Okay, Boker Tov. Today's daf is Pei Vav 86. We are a little behind. We pick up on Pei Hey with Bet. We are. It says like this. We are. Let's just start very quickly from the first wide line, middle of the first wide line. Rish Lakish having Mitzayim Arta de Rabbanan. Rish Lakish was marking the caves of the rabbis, so people would know to avoid them, or I don't know, maybe it indicates an early, sort of a practice to go and pray by them. When he came to the cave of Rabbi Chia, it was hidden from him, like he was right there, but he couldn't find it. So he became despondent. He said, was I not like as as analytical, like pupil, right? It's like sort of the analytical sharpness, of learning Torah. Was I not sort of as as great of a Torah prowess as he was? And you of course remained you remember the whole story with Rabbi Yochanan and Rish Lakish. Rish Lakish would constantly challenge Rabbi Yochanan and ask questions. So didn't I have as great Torah prowess? My heavenly voice came out and said, "Lo Torah comes with Bill Yes, and your ability to analyze and understand and what Torah, that you were as great as him. But Torah kamoso lo rivatzta. But you did not spread Torah like he did. So that gets back also to the question of like the Mas and Tovim, right? How much did that help other people? I mean, it helped Rabbi Yochanan, but how, much did that spread Torah throughout Klal Yisrael? Now we're going to see a story about how Rabbi Chia spread Torah through Klal Yisrael. Rabbi Chanina and Rabbi Chia would argue. Amarle, Rabbi Chanina would say to Rabbi Chia, you think you can argue with me? God forbid, if Torah was ever forgotten from the Jewish people, there's the word pilpul again. I would be able to restore it with my great analytical ability, right? So I would be able to sort of derive everything from first principles or something like that. Somehow, even if it was all forgotten, I would be able to recover it. Amarle Rabbi Chia said back to Rabbi Chanina, you think you're going to argue with me? I would make sure it never got forgotten. You would restore it. I have already acted in a way to ensure that it won't be forgotten. Why? What did you do? Maya vidna. What did I do? Azlina v'shadina kitna v'gadlina nishbi. I went and I planted flax seeds and I grew. I grew nets. I grew flax and I made out of them nets. V'tzaydina tavi, and I captured with them deer. Machila b'saraya liyasmi. I slaughtered the deer and I fed orphans their meat, so it was all going for l'shem shemaim, every part of the process. The arichna megilta, and I basically prepared, scrolls from the hides of the deer, because the kisvana chamisha chumshei, and I wrote, the five books of the Torah, each one on a separate scroll. The salitna lamas, and I went to a city. Umakrina chamisha yinukei v'chamisha chumshei, and I taught together 5 children. And I taught each one of them a separate one of the scrolls, one Bereshis, one Shmos, one whatever. Okay. And then I took 6 children and I taught each one of them one of the orders of Mishnayot. Of course, it doesn't say he wrote it because the orders of Mishnayot were Ba'al Peh. Okay. So I did, I had each one own a piece of it. And I said to them, Adadrana Vasina, I'm going to leave now. Before I come back the next time, what I want you to do while I'm gone, and I'll be back in a year, is Igru Hadadi, teach each other your piece. So read the Torah. You, the kid who knows Bereshis. I want you, while I'm gone, to teach all your friends Bereshis. And you, the kid who knows Shmos, I want you to teach all your friends Shmos. You, the guy who knows Zroim, I want you to teach everybody Zroim. Okay? Igru Hadadi, the Isnu Hadadi, teach each other the Mishnah. And therefore, the Avdila, and I made it, should not be forgotten from Israel. So, of course, it's a very beautiful story. First of all, from a modern perspective, the whole idea of, what they talk about sustainable, what's the phrase? Sustainable, but creating a sustainable system. So it's not just like, I went and I taught in a million different places. But I think the very fact that it gets us back to the planting of the nets, right? It's like, it's not just I donated some money and we bought it. Like, it's almost like I set up a whole system that could be self-sustaining, okay? But more also the sort of the pedagogical power, right? You're teaching kids. You're not teaching adults where you get to show off how brilliant you are and how many, brilliant conceptual distinctions. You're doing a very basic teaching of basic text, which is about memorizing, right? It's Mishnah and it's Chumash. It's not about analysis at all. It's about knowledge, right? So you're sort of, but understanding that it's not about how brilliant you are. It's about doing the hard work that's required, for the sake of Klal Yisrael. And right,
that they use the word pupil all the time, and now this is the conscious.
It's the opposite of pupil. Exactly that. And also the pedagogical point, the way the Marsha says it, right, is that he made every child into a lomaid and a melamed. He made every child into a learner and a teacher. Right, and that power that you teach others, and and the collaborative nature of it, also the fact that each one owns a section, so you can feel a sense of ownership over your piece, right? And then what that does to sort of empower people and to make them, part of the process and not just receivers but also givers, right? It's so powerful here, and it's exactly the point that you're patting yourself on the back. Look at what a huge Talmud Chacham and I could restore, which you almost hear a subtext of Rabbi Hanina, like, I wish Torah would be forgotten and I could show everybody how I could restore it, how great I am, right? Whereas it's like, you know what, it isn't about you, and it isn't about how smart you are, and it isn't whatever. The point is about what are you doing, for Klal Yisrael. So you got to do it here to protect it, that the Torah never does get forgotten.
Nevertheless, you did say this in a self-serving context. You shouldn't argue with me.
Yeah, that's true. Okay, and you also wonder what the Gemara means when they used to argue. Like, how many times could you have the same exchange? But anyway, it's a very sort of powerful musar here, right, about what really matters, and also about the educational, sort of the pedagogic principles here. Okay, so now it says like this. The Hainu Damar Rebbe, that's what Rebbe means when he says, Gedoli Masei Chia. Great are the deeds of Chia. I'm going maybe echoing the part before about Torah versus Masim Tovim. Remember that part before? Whether you were great in Masim Tovim, the deeds of Chia. It's not just, it doesn't really matter how brilliant of a Talmud Chacham you are. These deeds were what was the most powerful. Okay, Gedoli Masei Chia. Amalei Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi. Afilu Mimar. So Rabbi Yishmael Rabbi Yossi said to him, was he even greater than you, than Rebbe, than you, Rabbi Yehuda Nasi? Amalei, yes. Afilu me Abba, was he even greater than your father? Amalei, Chas v'Shalom, lo tekezos bizo. God forbid. And no, there would never be such a thing. Of course, the irony being,
my father. Meaning my father.
Afilu me, my father.
Rabbi Shmuel's father.
Even
Rabbi Yossi, that is.
Oh, really? Huh. That's what it says there?
Yeah.
I guess because he wouldn't refer to Rebbe's father as Abba. Okay, that's interesting. Okay, shkoyach. Fine. Let me just check Rashi. I guess they're not diverging from Rashi. I don't know why I thought it meant otherwise. Okay, interesting. All right, moving on. Okay, if it was Rebbe's father, it would have been interesting, because Rebbe's father was the one who said that he himself was he showed the anava, that he himself was a chometz ben yayin, he called Rebbe, etc. But anyway, I hear the read that it's his father. Okay, moving on. I'm a Reb Zera. So I said Reb Zera. Emes nearly Reb Yossi Reb Chanina. Last night appeared to me Reb Yossi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, Amartilo, and presumably in a dream. I said to him, Itzomiyata takua. By who are you planted? Who, where do you dwell up there in Olam Haba? Who's your chavrusa? Amalei Itza Reb Yochanan, by Reb Yochanan. Reb Yochanan Itzomi, who's Reb Yochanan sort of next to? It's Reb Yana. Rabbi Yana, so this is the hierarchy in heaven. Okay? Eitza Rabbi Chanina, by Rabbi Chanina. Remember, that was the Rabbi Chanina who just argued with Rabbi Chia. Rabbi Chanina, Eitza Minu, Rabbi Chanina, by Eitza Rabbi Chia, by Rabbi Chia. So there again, you see Rabbi Chia had the higher position in Gan Eden. Markilo, and I said to him, Yochanan, Eitza Rabbi Chia, low? I don't get it. Rabbi Yochanan, why wouldn't Rabbi Yochanan get to be right next to Rabbi Chia? So now we're sort of implicitly comparing Rabbi Yochanan and Rabbi Chanina, right? So anyway, so why is Rabbi Yochanan not directly there to Rabbi Chia? Wasn't he great? Rabbi Yochanan Amali, he said to me, but Azar is a kikin denura. Ubiurin de Asia, in a place where there is fire is burning and there are flashes of flames, right, shooting out. Man maya bar nafcha letaman. How can you bring the son of the smelter there? Like, so, which is because
It's like an appropriate place. Though.
well, the Marsha says that the Bar Nafcha, that's the guy who would actually like fan the flames, the bellows. So you don't want to be there if the fire is raging. You're going to get caught up. But apparently, also Rabbi Yochanan was called was apparently Bar Nafcha. That was his father's name, or maybe that was his profession or something. So, but it basically means like, presumably what it means is that there's so much heat being generated by the two of them, as we saw before from the story, that like, you don't want to, like, you got to give them some space or something, which doesn't mean that his level wasn't appropriate for that, but somehow the two of them, that was a very combustible chavruta, and you had to give it some distance. I don't really get what the point was, but okay, moving on. The point was that it was a combustible mix. Okay, so it says like this. Rabbi Chaviva said, Rabbi Chaviva bar Surmati. So there was another Rabbi Chaviva. This Rabbi Chaviva of the son of Surmati said to me, I saw one of the rabbis that had regular visitations from Eliyahu Hanavi. Okay, presumably you didn't need to be a huge named rabbi. Yeah, exactly. Okay, the Tzafra, and I saw this student. I knew he would regularly have some visits from Eliyahu. And one morning, Havi Shafirin Eine, I saw that his eyes were nice and good condition. Worse, and then by the evening, Damin Kim Nemiklin Benura. There was that fire imagery. They looked like they had been burned by fire. Amarle, I said to him, "My hi, what happened?" He said to me, because when I was talking to Eliyahu there, I said to him, show me the rabbis when they go up to the heavenly academy, the heavenly Beit Midrash, right? Because that's the sort of, we've shifted now. We've shifted and we've introduced the theme of fire, right? The fire between Rabbi Chaya and Rabbi Hanina. And then it says, who are they dwelling by? I mean, I said it, who's their chavruta? It wasn't exactly in the Gemara, but it's a little bit implicit, right? If Rabbi Chaya and Rabbi Hanina are having this fire going between them. So anyway, so now we're sort of shifting, containing with that idea of fire, but now they're up in heaven in a yeshiva, okay? So show me the rabbis as they ascend to heaven, in the to the heavenly academy. You can look at all of them. The bar except for the chariot, of Rabbi Chia. Logistically, you shouldn't look at it while it's going up. Presumably, I don't know. It sounds like they'd be in one place up in heaven where they would just dwell. And then every now and then they'd go up to another place where they'd have their yeshiva.
Yeah, they have to get to the base medrash.
They have to get to the base medrash. So I want to see them when they're going up to the yeshiva. So don't look at the chariot of Rabbi Chia. My simanayu. Now, so he said to him, "How will I know that it's his chariot to not look at it?" So Bekulu Azim Malachi Kisalki V'Nachti. For all of the other ones, the angels bring their chariots up and down to the they get a special ride by the angels up to the heavenly chariot. What?
An escort.
Right, an escort, right? But I think it also means that they bring up their chariot. Okay, Levarmi Guharkid Rabbi Chia, as opposed to the chariot of Rabbi Chia, to be Nafshi Salik Benachis. It goes up and down without even any angels, the power of Rabbi Chia himself. Okay, so in that case, Lo Matzai L'Ukbiya Nafshi. Then he said, I wasn't able to hold myself back to look at it. Like now it even gets more intriguing, right? Istakli Bay, I looked at it. Asutre Butiti Denura, two tongues of fire shot out, and they hit me, and they blinded my eye. The next day, so there again, Rabbi Chia is so powerful, and his chariot goes up by itself, and the fire, and it blinded him. Of course, there's a whole Eliyahu Navi type of a thing going on here as well. The next day I went and I prostrated myself by his cave. Amina, and I said to him, Masnisa Damar Masnina, I learn your Breitas, right? Because Rabbi Chia was like the editor of the Tosefta. So I am so devoted to your teaching, Rabbi Chia. It's only your Toseftas, your Breitas that I teach. I don't teach any of the other Breitas. And so please, save me or help me. The Itzai, and I was healed. Okay. So that's the sort of the story about Rabbi Chia and the fire and so on. Now, Eliyahu, by the way, it's also true if you think about it, because we're talking about, here's Rabbi Chia. Before we mentioned Rabbi, we said Rabbi wasn't as big of a Talmid Chacham as Rabbi Eliezer ben Shimon, right? But these two weren't these biggest Talmidei Chacham, who are the biggest Talmidei Chachamim of their generation in the sense of their intellectual prowess, were still the ones to whom we owe all of our Torah Shabbal Peh. right? So, okay, there was some Rabbi Eliezer. How many times does anybody remember a teaching of Rabbi Eliezer Rabbi Shimon, right? He might have been a bigger Talmud Chacham, right? But because Rebbe devoted himself to organizing all of this stuff, all of the material to create the Mishnah, right? That's why we have Torah Shabbat Paz. We have it. Rabbi Chia, right, besides the story we just read, devoted himself to organizing and creating the Tosefta, right? So it's not necessarily like the stuff where you get to show off your intellectual prowess, but it's what did the best for being Marbitz Torah for Klal Yisrael. Okay, so that's the story of Rabbi Chia.
Nevertheless, like the stories on too high, on such a higher level, this guy still did have like a scar from it. You know what I mean? Like his eyes were still
right, which just shows. Look at the high level that they had up in heaven. They had the highest. Rabbi Chia had the highest level, even though this Rabbi Chanina was the bigger Mefal Pel B'Torah. So that's exactly the story. Okay, so okay. Eliyahu V'Shchiach B'Mesifta to Rebbe. Now Eliyahu would sometimes drop down. So it's here that rabbis are going up to the yeshiva up in heaven. Eliyahu would sometimes visit the yeshiva of Rebbe. Okay, down on here on earth. Yom Echad Reish Yarchahave. One day it was Rosh Chodesh. Nagalei, and he was postponed. Below also he didn't come. Amalei, my time on Nagalei Lamar. So Rebbe said to him, "Hey, you were late. What's your excuse? Okay, why were you late today?" Amalei, Adu Ukimna Avraham. No, here's what I have to do. Presumably, he would only do it on Rosh Chodesh. Okay, I wake up Avraham up there in heaven, Umashina Yadei, and I wash his hands for him. Umatzli, and he prays. What can I tell you? That's a good point. Avram gets up early on himself. That's true. Umagnina lay, and then I make him. I lay him down to sleep. Okay, so why they need Eliyahu to wake them up in general? What does that mean? Also, does that mean that they wake up their neshamas up in Shemayim, or this might even suggesting something even more like a little more shocking? Even within this context, that like he goes to Marat HaMachpelah and he sort of like wakes them up here down on earth. Anyway, so why exactly he needs to be the one to wake them up? I mean, I guess if it's talking about their dead bodies,
and then the other rabbis aren't being woken up before.
What
we just read about?
Right, that's what I'm saying. But here he might be waking up their dead bodies. Okay, Amalei, and so for some, and is there somebody comparable to them in terms of the power? Did I skip a line? I must have skipped a line. I did. Okay, I knew I was missing a punchline. Why don't you wake them all up at the same time so they can pray at the same time? Savi note, Kifi Barachami, they will be too powerful with their prayers if they're all praying at the same time. And they'll bring Mashiach before it's right time. So presumably what they're praying for is they're praying for the redemption. Now exactly what this is about in terms of Rosh Chodesh, it could be the whole Rosh Chodesh is the whole symbol of future redemption, the waxing and the waning of the moon, right? So anyway, so maybe they had a special tefillot on Rosh Chodesh for the redemption, but he wanted to make sure they didn't do it all at the same time because then it would have come too soon.
It is every Rosh Chodesh.
Every Rosh Chodesh.
But today he was late, though.
What? Today he was late. Well, I don't know. It was the first Rosh Chodesh since he started coming. I don't know. He said to him, Yeshuk Masam Balam. I mean, it could be the Rosh Chodesh is just by chance, but it doesn't sound like that. It sounds like this was an unusual occurrence. The Yeshuk Masam Balam is out there. Is there somebody like them in this world that has that power of prayer or of their combined power? Because there was three of them. So we're back to Rabbi Chia. Yes, Rabbi Chia and his sons, their prayer would be as powerful as the prayer of Amram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So again, the power of Rabbi Chia. Goes to Rabbi Tanisa. So Rabbi said, "Oh, great. Let's try now to bring the Mashiach in its, before it's time, because now I know who can pray and make it happen." So he said, "We're going to have a tainus because get everybody praying together, and the power of everybody praying together. And he had Rabbi Chia and his sons be the Shlichei Tzibor, which is very interesting. They are Shlichei Tzibor as a threesome. If you look at Tosfos, look at the Tosfos of Peivav Amud Aleph. Achtinu Rabbi Chia Bana v'Avagav the Tani Megillah Ein Moridin L'Fnei Lo Me'anshei Chifa. Oh, that's a different point. Tosfos says Ukmino L'Fnei Ateva Peivav Amud Aleph. Next stop. Shloshan, all three of them. Kedushinim b'midrash k'ptanis, tzibur yordim lifnei ateva, shloshan. K'dechsi v'yirei Moshe k'vedim v'Aaron v'chor, etc. But in the tiniest, you would actually have three people. I mean, presumably only one would say the Shmon Esrei, but we have three people there present leading the tzibur. Okay, so I had all three of them go down. Let me hear one of them. Amar Mashi v'ruach. He said Mashi v'ruach v'nash v'zika. The wind blew. Okay. Amar Morid HaGeshem brings the rain down. The Asa Mitra, the rain came, which also is normally what you want when you're making a tanis tzibor for the rain. But the Rebbe wasn't just interested in the rain. Okay, Kimata Lememar Mechayim Mesim. Okay, Rug was about to say Mechayim Mesim, that would have brought the Tchias Mesim, and it wasn't the right time. So Rugish Alma, the whole world shook. Amri Berkia, they said up in heaven. Mandali Razia Ba'alma, who revealed this secret in the world, that the power of the prayer of these three people. Amri Eliyahu. Okay, so they sort of reported on Eliyahu. They tattled. Okay, so they said Eliyahu. Asyul Eliyahu, they brought Eliyahu. And Machiu Shisim Pulse Dinura. They gave him 60 lashes of fire. There's the lashes of fire. I don't know what he makes of any of this.
No, I mean,
why 60? I don't know. Also, Idmi like Keduva Dinur. So now Eliyahu had to go correct this, right? This was all happening in a split second before he got up to Mechai Mason. So Eliyahu went and he appeared to them like a bear of fire. I don't know what the bear image is either. Al Beinayu, he went among them, Vitardinahu, and he distracted all of them and scattered all of them. So broke up the whole davening before they got to Mechai Mason.
Okay, that's why he was late. You have to do all this.
No, he did all this. What do you mean doing? He was late because he woke up out of his Yaakov. Once he revealed this, then this was a new story that happened afterwards. Okay. Anyway, that's another story, but shows the power again of Rebbe Chi and the power of his prayer with that whole imagery of the fire, etc. Okay, Shmuel Yarchinaah. Shmuel, this is just Shmuel, the one we call Shmuel. Why it's called the Yarchinaah? Some say Rashi says because he was a big astronomer and he knew about how to do Rosh Chodesh and so on, which also echoes the Rosh Chodesh in Yerach. Yereach is the moon. Okay, so Shmuel, the lunar one or something. Aski the Rebbe Habe. He was like a real worldly man, right? An astronomer, a doctor. He was like an early Rambam. Okay, so anyway, he was Rebbe's doctor. So we're now continuing here with Rebbe. Chalash Rebbe Be'enei. Again, the whole eye thing. A lot of themes are repeated. Rebbe had a problem with his eye. He said, should I put into it some salve inside of the eye? No, I can't. It's too sensitive. I can't take salve in the eye. Should I put some type of an ointment on top of your eye? No, I can't handle that. So, having mostly the gusa de same, so what he did is he put some type of a reed that would underneath the pillow, underneath the bed, and it would bring up the fragrance of some type of a thing that he burned that would be healing. Okay, the itzi, and Rebbe healed. So now Rebbe wanted to give Shmuel smicha because Shmuel was never called Rav so and so. Shmuel never received smicha. So here he was, his doctor, this huge worldly person with worldly knowledge, and sciences, big Tam Chacham. Rebbe wanted to give him smicha. The irony is, remember, Rebbe gave smicha before to the guy who sold his body, the son of Rebbe Shimon, and here he couldn't give Shmuel smicha. It never worked out. Rashi said, for whatever reason, anytime he tried to get the sages together, you couldn't get Shmuel. When you got Shmuel, you couldn't get the sages together. Somehow it never worked out.
But he's always quoted.
But not as Rebbe. He never had smicha. Okay, it never worked out. Shmuel said, the master, you, Rebbe, don't be anguished that you can't give me smicha. I had a vision of the book of Adam Arishon. Apparently, Rashi says, this was like the book up in heaven in which all the future generations are written out, like the history book before the history had happened. Okay, Viksiv Bay, and in it was written, Shmuel Yarchana, Shmuel, the lunar one, me, Chachim Yitkari will be called a sage, a wise person. For Rebbe Lo Yitkari will never be called a Rebbe. Okay, I will never get smicha. Like, okay, it's like it didn't hurt him too much. Shmuel is one of the most quoted Amoraim in the Gemara. There's a nice Marsha. The Marsha says, we paskin like Shmuel in Dinei Mamanis and not in Isser V'Heter. And the word chacham is often a word used in the context of dinei mamanis, that somebody has to be a chacham and so on. And by Isser V'Heter, the smicha is yore to teach Isser V'Heter. So, like the word that he's a chacham and not a rebbe, the parallels that we paskin like him in dinei mamanis, in monetary matters and not in classic ritual matters. Okay. The Asu de Rebbe al Yadoteh. And it also said that Rebbe's healing will come through me. So that's a great merit, that through me will come your healing. So don't worry about it. I'm fine with what I'm going to get. Okay, now we get a famous line here for anybody, for all the scholars who are interested in how the Talmud was edited and the Mishnah was edited and arranged. So this is part of what Shmuel sees written in this book up in heaven. So that was Shmuel. Now we're going on to the next generation. Rebbe v'Rebbe Nosson Sof Mishnah. Rebbe and Rebbe Nosson are the end of the period of the Mishnah. Rav Ashi v'Ravina Sof Hora'ah. And Rav Ashi and Ravina are end of the period of teaching. Now, again, by the way, Rav Ashi and Ravina didn't exist yet in the time of Shmuel, but okay, he's looking at this prehistory book. Now, what does this mean that Rebbe and Rebbe Nassan are the end of the Mishnah period? It could just mean, the Tanai period. It could be it's not even talking about the editing of the Talmud or the Mishnah at all. It could just say the period of the Tanaim end with Rebbe and Rebbe Nassan, and the period of the Amoraim, end with Rav Ashi and Ravina. But Rashi translates this very much into this sort of editing process. So let's just read these very important and famous Rashi here. If you look at Rashi, 3 lines down, Sof Mishnah, Sof Tanayim. Okay, so first he just says they were end of the Tanaitic period. Until their time, everybody would repeat their own traditional teachings. And there was no order to them. Like everybody, there would be all these individual mishnayot. They weren't even physical, right? They were just oral teachings. And everybody would have different sort of these oral teachings. There was no organization. V'sider v'kibet, v'lo yimesachas durot, V'seder nekpat ala seder. There was nothing sort of organized. V'heim kalalo more bedoros shalifneihem. They organized all the stuff that came before them, put it all together. And they ordered it into different orders. Now Rashi says that actually there is some Mishnaic material that's post-Rebbe.
What is that?
I don't know. Well, the end of Sota says after Rebbe died, the Anava died in the world. So that had to have been written after Rebbe. Anyway, but there is a little bit of Tanaitic material. Basically, the entire work and effort and structure and organization, all that was created with Rebbe, apparently with Rebbe Nassan, who's a name we don't hear that often, but presumably he helped Rebbe in that process. And what's Ravin and Rav Ashi Sof Hora'ah? This is even more interesting because this gets to how the Talmud was written. Sof Kol HaMorayim, the end of the Amoraic period. Gemara ala Seder. There was no organized Gemara like the teaching associated with each Mishnah. And somebody said, what's the reason for this Mishnah? Like, why is there this opinion? What does so-and-so say? Or somebody had a halachic question. So then there would be some discussion. You have a halachic question. Oh, wait, maybe we can learn it out from this Mishnah. Let's discuss the applications, etc., etc. Okay, but it would all be very ad hoc and no sort of consistent approach to every single Mishnah, organizing all the material and so on. Okay, the Rav Ashi Ravina Sidu Shmuat Amoraim Shalifneihem. They organized all of the different teachings that came before them. The Kavul Seder Masechtot, and they organized it according to the different tractates. Right, all the discussions relating to this Mishnah they put on this Mishnah, etc. Everyone associated with its relevant Mishnah. So they organized the pre-existing material. And not only that, and they also, after they organized the material, they continued the discussion. And they said, wait a minute, what about this question? What about this? How do you deal with that? How do you do that? So they actually added the final layer. They didn't just organize like Rebbe, but they added the final layer of the discussion and of the text. And they put it on the Gemara. Go. Now Rashi is basically going to tell you, here is what Ravina and Rav Ashi did. When you see a Gemara say Esfei, I'll ask you, Meisfei, Raminihi, Yibailu. Okay, all those questions. What about this? What about that? Those key words. So basically what Rashi is saying is that Ravina and Rav Ashi are the stam. They're the anonymous voice. They organized all this stuff before, and then they asked all these other questions, and they provided the anonymous voice. Now, scholars disagree with this. Not only scholars, they say the anonymous voice, well, they say pieces maybe came earlier, but mostly the anonymous voice came even after Ravina and Rav Ashi. And actually, there's a famous letter called the Igersha of Shri-Ragon. The Rav Shri-Ragon was asked about how the whole Mishnah and Gemara were written. He writes this long letter, or whatever, not because it wasn't written, but this long letter where he describes it, and he basically quotes his Gemara. And he basically says, not like Rashi. Rashi makes it sound like everything was so scattered, they did the same organizing thing. You don't get that sense when you read the Gemara. You get the sense when you read the Gemara that actually they would learn Mishnah al HaSeder and have discussions al HaSeder. So anyway, he, Rav makes it sound more like there was like layering, right? You have one generation and they have their contribution. The next generation came and they had their contribution. But it was basically still ordered according to the order of the Masechta and the Mishnayot. And then Ravina and Rav Ashi, he says, were the last Hora'ah. They gave the last halachic contributions to the Gemara. And then the Rabbanon Savorai that came later, they had discussions in the Gemara, but they were never really of a halachic nature. Actually, and they point out, like, for example, the first sugya of Kiddushin, goes all of these things about why does it say mikudeshes, and why does it say niknis and not mikudeshes, and why lashon zachar and lashon nekeva, and asks all these like technical grammar questions without introducing any new halachic material, just drawing on pre-existing halachic material. You also have something similar in the beginning of Bava Kama. So basically, he says the Rabbanon after this layers were added, but no new halachic material was added. That's how Rav Shrirgon says it. Okay, but now to finish Rashi, he says like this.
I'm sorry. So according to Rashi, Rebbe's role and according to Rav Shrirgon was the same, just Ravina and Rav Ashi's.
Yeah. They're basically debating the Ravina and Rashi. Okay, so. And they gave the answers what was not done by those that preceded them. And even questions that were asked before that were not put in their right place, they put in the right place. So they organized all the material and then they added this final layer. Okay, so that's a very important take about what Ravina and Rav Ashi did, and that leads a lot of Rishonim to assume that Ravina and Rav Ashi were the authors of the Stam. But as I said, that's not what the scholars assume, and it's not so much what like this Yigeris of Rosh Shrirgon says either. Okay, back to the Gemara. That was a nice little digression of 2 lines of the Gemara.
So when did the Stam take? When did that happen? And according to those other opinions,
like in the few, like whatever the next period
during that layer, even during the Severine.
Yeah, exactly. But they might say that there was stam elements even before. Like it might have been the stam. There's not just a final layer. It's not clear that there was an actual.
Ravina Rashi, according to Rosh Shrirgon, did organize everything until then. Rav Shrirgon
is what I'm saying. Does not Rashi assigns them a whole organizing role. Rav Shrirgon does not say that. He basically says the structure was there from Rabbi, and the other generations just kept on sort of.
What did Ravina Rashi do then?
They were just the end of the Hora'ah. They didn't do any major editing process. That's the way Rashi would say. They were just the last halachic contribution to the Gemara. Okay, so it says like this: Simancha aravo el miktashi. That's Rav Ashi. Al Avina La'achrisam. That's Ravina. So Ravina and Rav Ashi. Okay, that's the end. La'achritam, the end of the process. I'm Rav Kana. Yishtayli Rav Chama Barbarte. Dechama. Rabba Bar Nachmani. So Rav Chama, the son of the daughter of Chama, Rabba of Chama. Rabba Bar Nachmani. Actually, so he said to me the following. Rabbi Bar Nachmani, who is Rabba, when we say Rabba in the Gemara, it's Rabbi Bar Nachmani. So Rabba, Agav Shmada Nach Nafshe, because of some decree of the government, he ultimately brought about his death. What happened? Now, what this is doing about anything before, it's not clear, except we're talking about the great rabbis, Rabbi Chia, Rabbi Chanina, who was Sophorah. So we're going to tell some other great story about a great rabbi. So Rabba, because of some decree of the government, that brought about his death. What was the story? There were people that were slandering the Jews in the house of the king, maybe fellow Jews. Amru, and they said, there's one person among the Jews, the Kamivato Tracer Alfe Gavra in Israel, Yarcha Bekaitav Yarcha Besitva. He makes 12,000 Jews not do their work 1 month in the summer and 1 month in the fall, because this is basically the month before Pesach and the month before Sukkot, and they have spending a month coming to yeshiva. Everybody took off of work, and there was a whole month. It was called Yarchei Kala, what's the Yarach, right? And they were doing the learning in yeshiva, and they said, yeah, but then we're not collecting taxes from them during those months. Presumably they would collect taxes on a monthly basis. Okay, and they were saying, so it's a big problem, lowering the productivity, we're not collecting the taxes. Okay, so and they're taking them away from paying the king's tax, the king's poll tax. So they sent the king's messenger or officer to go seize Rabbah. They couldn't find him. He ran from Pumbedisa to Akra. He went from one place to the next, one village to the next. And then he went back from Ein Damim to Pumbedisa, running away from this officer from the king. And he was discovered in Pumbedisa. How was he discovered? By the following case. So this king's officer came to the inn that Rabbi was staying at, and presumably, one understanding of this is he didn't realize yet Rabbi was there. He was just running after trying to find Rabbi. He happened to chance at the same inn. The owners of the inn brought a plate in front of him of food, and they gave him 2 cups of wine or of beer, whatever it was. And they removed the plate. Hadar Partsufe Lachure. And what happened was his face got turned around, got turned backwards, whatever happened. So because the point is that the idea of doubles, pairs, so it's 2 cups of wine for the whole meal, is something that exposes somebody to the acts of the shadim, of the demons. So this officer, unintentional to the owners of the inn, they weren't paying attention, he drank these 2 cups of wine and he was attacked by demons. And this thing happened to his face. Okay, and so far, presumably, he didn't realize that Rabbi was there, presumably. Okay, Amrule, Mina Avile, Gavadim Alkahu. So the owners of the inn went to Rabbi, who presumably was hiding, and they said to him, "What are we going to with this king and this person? What can we do to help him? He's a king's officer. We need to help him out." Amrule, he said to them, to put the plates back, which presumably will make it a continuation of the meal. Okay. Mikamei, and give him another cup of wine, and then remove the plate. So now we've had 3 cups at one meal, and not 2. By bringing the plate back, it makes it a continuation. Okay, the litzi, and then he'll be healed. They did it, and he was healed. So Amar, so now this officer realized, how did he get healed? Somebody here must be very wise. I bet Rabba is hiding out here. Like it's not clear from the story that's what's happening, but I think that's implied. That's what the Marsha says. Amar, maybe you done it. I know the person I'm looking for is here. Who that is here? Bachi, he searched for him, but he found him. Amar, but of course he was very grateful because he healed him. So he said, Azlina meha, I'm going to leave here. And I'll say I couldn't find you. If they actually execute me, Lo maglina, I won't reveal where you're hiding. Vinagidi, but if they torture me, then if they torture me, then maglina, then I'll reveal it. I can't withstand torture, right? Very, very human in understanding, right? That torture can be worse than death. Okay, so Asir Lakame, so they brought Rabba in front of him. Ailula Adruna, they put him into a room, Vitarke, the Bava, the Anpe, and they locked the door in his presence. Now, it's not exactly clear to me. I didn't see the Marsha didn't explain either. If he was going to go back to the king and say he couldn't find him, why did they have to lock Rabba in a room? Right? So I don't know. Maybe he was like, I have no idea. But anyway, maybe if he got tortured, then they would find where Rabba was, and I don't know. Anyway, but Rabba was being locked in a room. So Rabba prayed. Parak Ashita, the door broke down. Arak, so Rabba ran away again. But Azala Agma, he went back to Agma, which is one of the places he was before. He was sitting on a chopped down palm tree. The Kagaris, and he was learning. Now, up in heaven, a debate was going on. We're back to the heavenly court. Okay, another very famous Gemara. There was the following debate that was going up in the heavenly court. The Mishnah teaches that if the Torah says that if a person has a white hair of tzarat, they're tamei. But if there becomes a spot of white, that sort of spreads over the body, whatever, then the person is tahor. So it matters what the order is. If the white sort of becomes before the white hair, tamei, he's tamei. But if the white, I'm sorry, I said that wrong. I was thinking about something else. It says that a person has a white spot, and then it says, and if a white hair emerges from the white spot, then it's tzarat. Okay, so the Mishnah teaches, but if the white hair was there first and the white spot came afterwards, it's not tzarat. If the white hair came first, tahor, and then the spot on the skin, he's tahor. Suffolk. Now, what if it's a doubt? Which one came first? So Baruch Hu Omer tahor. God says it would be tahor. But everybody else in the heavenly court, amri tameh. They say it would be tameh. Now it's interesting because you heard before about the heavenly court. I wonder, is the heavenly court made up of angels, or is the heavenly court made up of all the dead rabbis? Right? Because before we heard the rabbis were going up to the heavenly court. So here you have God arguing with the rabbis. Okay, and there's a lot to do with this Gemara. What does this mean about Suffolk? Because there's another Gemara that says, Mika Sfeika Kame Shmaya. Right? Is there ever any doubt as far as heaven is concerned? So to a little bit it says God, who knows everything, he can look at a case of doubt or whatever, and he can sort of, he's going to weigh in favor of things being tahor. We as human beings, we don't know how to deal with doubt. It's our human it's our human, limit, the fact that we're limited as humans, we don't know how to deal with doubt. So we're going to have to play it safe, and we're going to have to say tameh, right? But that sort of brings more tumah to the world, as it were, but that's sort of the human condition. Okay, anyway, so this was the debate that was going on. And they said, Man nochach. Who can we call on that will sort of decide this case, decide between God and be the deciding vote? Okay, it's sort of like they tell a story with Abraham Lincoln that he took a vote in his cabinet and he said A and everybody else said nay. So he said 1 A, 10 nays, the A's have it. So anyway, okay, so it's God against everybody else, but we need a deciding vote. Who's going to be the deciding vote? Nochach Rabbi Bar Nachmani. Okay, let's get Rabbi Bar Nachmani. He'll be our deciding vote. Of course, he was still alive. He couldn't join the Heavenly Academy until he died. Okay, Rabbi Bar Nachmani. Now, how do we know that he should be the deciding vote? Well, look what he says about himself. He says, "Ani yachi ben negoyim, ani yachi bawalos." I am the most, the greatest authority in issues of negoyim, of spots of leprosy, and issues of orlos, of tumah. So, Rabbi, you're the greatest authority. Come up here to heaven and help us decide our case. Shadu shlicha batrei is so wonderful. The same way the king sent a messenger to go find Rabbi, right? The heavenly court, the divine king, is sending a messenger also to basically kill Rabbi, bring Rabbi up to heaven. Okay, lo having matzi malach hamavis lemikravle. Now the malach hamavis couldn't get close to him. Why? Lo having kapasik pumim girsei, because he would never stop learning.
Same with David.
Same story as King David. Adahachi no shivzika, but then a wind blew. The avish beini kani, and it made some noise between the reeds. Savar gunda the parshihu, and Rabbi said, "Oh my God, it must be the king's troops are coming to seize me." Because remember, that story hadn't exactly finished. Amar Tainach Nafshi Dahu Gavra. Rabbi said, I should die. It's interesting, just because he interrupted to say it's the king's troop, you would have thought Machamab should have got him at that second. But it's actually a better story because he actually willingly went to his death. He said, I should die rather than being given over to the kingdom, to the government. Okay, because maybe he was afraid of being tortured or whatever. So so as he was dying, so then the Malach HaMavis took him and he was dying. Okay, and he said, Tahor, Tahor. So he actually, as he was dying, they needed his vote right away. So as he was dying, he says, Rabbi, what do you say? What's the psalm? He said, it's Tahor. Okay, by the way, notice that he sided here with God, right? Okay. Yatzta Baskova Amra, heavenly voice came out and said, Ashrecha Rabbi Bar Nachmani, praise you, Rabbi Bar Nachmani, Shegufcha Tahor, your body is pure, Yatzta Nishmascha B'Tahor, and your soul departed with the word Tahor. Okay, now by the way, I just want to show you something hilarious. If you look at the second line of the Gemara, when we read it before, the second wide line, where it said, Mesifta Derkiya Amri Tameh, the heavenly court says it's Tameh, you see that there's a little bet there by the word Tameh, which indicates that that's how we pass it. So God and Rabbi said Tahor, and we paskin l'halacha tameh, okay? Because it's actually in a Mishnah in the Goyim, the actual anonymous voice is tameh, okay? And it's only a das yachid, a single rabbi who says Tahor, which again is that beautiful idea, about humans paskening against God. Right, so it's like a wonderful irony. They got Rabba to have the deciding vote up in heaven, but here down on earth, we wound up paskening with the human vote. Okay. By the way, there's also a tremendous parallel between this story and the famous story of the Tana Shalachnai. Everybody remember the Tana Shalachnai, right, with Rabbi Linzer and the bending walls of the Beit Midrash, right? And they were also debating, and Rabbi and everybody else was saying Tameh, and he was saying Tahor. And actually, the follow-up story of that is that when he was dying, the rabbis came, but he was in Chayrim, so they couldn't get too close to his bed, so they stayed outside of 4 amos in his bed or whatever. And they said, they asked him, you're going to retract your position and finally concede to what everybody else said? And he said, no, I stick to my position, and it was Tahor. Right, and then it says, if I remember correctly, it says the same ending. His soul departed with the word Tahor. So it's exactly sort of the same thing of the human sort of control of Torah deciding against God, right? And the person here who's sort of siding with God, sort of saying Tahor and dying, but maybe not fit for this world. It's a very powerful parallel between those stories. Okay, now the Gemara says like this: Navo pitcham yerkia, a little petek, right? A little like a piece of paper, came out of heaven. In Pumpadisa, descended from heaven in Pumpadisa, and it said on it the following thing: Rabbi Bar Nachmani spakesh b'yeshiva Shamala. Rabbi Bar Nachmani was called up to the heavenly base medrash. Okay, they needed him to give shir up in the heavenly base medrash. Navku Rabbi, anyway, so he died. Now, of course, so Rabbi and Rav and all the rabbis went out to take care of his body and to bury him. But law the other duchte, they didn't know where he was. Remember, he had been in hiding from the government. And they went to Agma, the place where he was hiding. And they saw birds that were providing, shading over a space and just hovering in one place. They said, he must be there. They're protecting his body. So presumably, though, they couldn't get to his body, but they knew that that's where he was. So Saftua Tlosa Yomi, they eulogized him for 3 days. With Tlosa Lelusa 3 nights. Naval Pitka, and another heavenly sort of a little piece of paper came down and said, anybody who stops, you haven't done enough. Anybody who stops the eulogizing will be in Chayrim. So Saftua Shiva Yomi, so they went for 7 days. Naval Pitka Luchul Beitchem, L'Shalom. Finally, now another heavenly thing came out. Go home. You're done. Okay, you're done showing him proper respect. That day that he died, Dalia Za'afa, a heavenly wind came, okay, Vidori Lahutaya, and lifted up like an Arab, Taya is like an Arab nomad, like on his camel. Hirachi Gamla, when he was riding on his camel. Mihai Gisa in the Har Papa, he lifted him up at one end of the Har Papa, Vashadi Bahach Gisa, and threw him onto the other side of the river Papa. Now, presumably, this is because there's this heavenly anger that Rabbi was not buried. I mean, it's a question like, did they really have a choice, right? Well, they did what they could do, but it seems like anyway, things he didn't get the full respect that could have been given to him. Amri said, "My eye, what's going on?" Amri, so people said to him, "Nach nafshi the Rabbi Bar Nachmani. Rabbi Nachmani died, and things are all tumult in the world." So Amar Lufana, so the Arab now is praying. Ribbono shel olam, master of the world, very firm sounding Arab. Kulei alma didachu. He actually speaks Aramaic, this Arab. The whole world belongs to you. And you now, and Rabbi Nachmani is yours, and you now have him. At the Rabbi didach. You're pals with Rabbi, Rabbi's pals with you, or you have Rabbi as you. The two of you are together now. Why are you destroying the world? Okay, it's a terrible thing that he died or whatever, but it's not clear. It got upset that Rabbi was dead. Like, what's the anger about? What was this response about? Like, I really don't know. Anyway, nach za'afa, so the anger calmed down. Rabbi Shimon, now one last story of all these stories, which doesn't seem to be
parallel of the shaking.
Of the shaking of the rushes, right? Just before Rabbi died.
No, but there was a shaking when Rabbi.
When they were praying, Rabbi Chi and his sons were praying, and the world was shaking because the world was disturbed. That's a good point too. Okay, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Rabbi Shimon ben Chalafta, Bal Basar Havi, was very overweight, corpulent would be a good translation. Yom Echad Havi Chamim Alei. One day it was very hot. He would sit at the top of a rock of a mountain. And he would say to his daughter, "Biti, hanifi alai b'manifa, fan me with a fan to cool me off. I will give you bundles of nerd, which is some aromatic, herb or whatever." While he was waiting for her to do it, a wind came. And it was cooled him off. How many bundles of this herb now do I have to give to the owner of the wind? Now I have to owe it all to God. So what does that have to do with anything? So you could say it's got some of the wind theme going on here. Rashi also says it ends with the whole discussion about, it's so funny to say this, but before we were discussing, remember way back at the beginning, these very overweight rabbis, right? How that discussed 2 days ago. So now we're ending somehow the discussion with an overweight rabbi. I can't really explain it. Okay. Hakol K'minhag Medina, going back for a moment to some halachic discussion. Okay, when you make a stipulation with the workers, it goes by whatever the practices are of the country. So Hakol Asuyimai, what is it coming to include? In a place where they have the practice that you would basically give them some bread and drink. Anfika anafka. And they would do it what does nafka mean again? Hold on. What's Rashi say? Oh, in a vessel that holds a revius. Okay, that they would give them some bread and drink. A certain measure of drink. So what does Hakol K'minhag Medina mean? If he says to them, now there's two interpretations of this. One is either, I want you to come early and have your meal, your breakfast, before the work starts. Okay, I don't want you to be eating on my time. I want you to have I'll give you the breakfast, but I'm going to give it to you early, before the day starts. So Amrulay, they could say local kaminach. No, I'm sorry, you don't have the right to do that. The standard practice is we get the breakfast after the working hours have begun. Tosfos has another version, which is basically that they would normally take a break and go back to the main house and get their snack. And he said, no, you stay at your work. I'll bring it to you. So so you don't have to take off of your work. And they say, no, we have a right to actually do what the minhag is and take our break and go have it at the house. Okay, so there's a story that he sold his goods, hire for us workers. He promised to pay them food, and then he said, "Oh my God, then you're going to have to give them huge feasts because they're bnei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. So go change the terms of the agreement." So the Gemara says, "Ma'aseh listur." This story contradicts because we've said it's hakol kamin Medina, and here he's saying that if you promise them, you have to give them a huge feast. So the Gemara says, "No, it's missing words. Here's how you teach it. If it was already the practice to give them food, and then you explicitly stipulated to feed them, then riba lehen. That explicit stipulation means that you're going to provide for them more than the norm. Okay? Now, how much more is not clear. But now we have a story that at least Rabbi Yochanan ben Metzia understood that the more would be like almost infinite, would be enormous. He went and he agreed to give food. So he made an explicit stipulation when it wasn't necessary. And his father said, even if you make for them feasts like Shlomo when he was at the height of his kingdom, you wouldn't fulfill your obligation to the sons of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Now that doesn't mean that the other rabbi said, no, it may be more, but not that much more. Maybe even when you say that you're going to give them and you're explicit, it never really exceeds what the norm is.
Did we just have that?
Yes, I was just quoting the Mishnah.
Oh, that was.
But it was just explaining the context of the Mishnah. Was even though Hakol Kamin Medina, at least according to this opinion, if you explicitly stipulate, then you have to give more. And this interpretation of more would mean you'll never fulfill your obligation. So now the Gemara is going to have some more about it, because now we're saying that Shlomo had big feasts. And Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov had even bigger feasts than Shlomo, because their children deserve a bigger feast than Shlomo. Okay, so the Gemara says like this: the Meima de Sudazat Avram Avinu Adivim to Shlomo. You're telling me Avram's feast was bigger than Shlomo? Vaksiv, it says by Shlomo, V'yilechem Shlomo liyom echad shloshim kor. So that's Shlomo's bread for one day was 30 kor, 30 whatever, huge measures of fine flour, v'shishim kor kemach, and 60 measures of more bran flour. Asara bakar bri'im, 10 healthy cattle, the esrim, it should be bakar re'i, and 20 cattle grazing out in the pasture, umeatzon, and 100 sheep, levad, and not to mention ayov v'tzvi v'yachmur, these different types of wild animals, gazelles, etc. Ubarburim avusin, and stuffed fowl, or stuffed, what's a bar nowadays is what? Is it a goose? I always get from your visit with a goose or a duck. Does anybody know? Okay, anyway, it's either a goose or a duck. I forget what it is in modern Hebrew. The Amar, okay.
Let's say avusin.
Yeah.
Yeah, they say avusin hens.
Hens?
Yeah.
Stuffed hens? Okay.
Well,
Anyway, in modern Hebrew, barbar is, I think, a duck or a goose. I just don't remember which. Okay. The Amar Goyim ben Asita Mishmei Rav, and our Goyim didn't say the name of Rav said halalu. So if that wasn't enough of a excessive amount, now we're going to exaggerate it to the nth degree. All of that stuff, all that bread we just read about, was not the bread for the meal. That was just lamol and shel tvachim. That was just the bread to put on the pots to draw out the overflow of the pots. Okay? Rabbi Yitzchak Amar, hello, all that meat we just discussed, that was just for some type of appetizer. That wasn't the main meal. Okay? There was some type of some mincemeat or something. Rabbi Yitzchak, Elef Noshim Ayu Shlomo. I'll do you one better. Shlomo had 1,000 wives. This was the meal that every wife prepared. So he actually had 1,000 times this. My time, each one said, maybe he'll eat by me today. Maybe he'll eat by me. So each one prepared this meal for him. Okay, so that was Shlomo. You look up by Avram. See, by Avram was much more modest. It says, it sounds like it was only one cattle. We expanded a little bit. Ben Bakar, the calf. Achat, that means one calf. Rach, soft, Shnaim, that refers to a second calf. The Tov, Shlusha, okay, there were 3 calves. So there were 3 calves compared to all of this. Clearly, Shlomo's was greater. But says no. Remember, there were 3 angels. So each angel got a calf. Okay? Hacha here, although his feast was huge, but it was L'Kol Yisrael Yehuda. It wasn't just for him, which didn't sound like it before. When the wives were preparing it, it sounded like it was just for him. But now we're saying it wasn't just for him. He was feeding the entire Jewish people. Shenemar Yehuda Yisrael Rabim Kechol Hashel Svasayam. Okay, so therefore, on a per person basis, okay, it's like they say, right? Lawyers make an enormous amount of money, but if you figure out per hour, are they really, are they really making minimum wage? So anyway, so on a per person basis, okay, so Avram was bigger, okay. Now, my barbarim avusim, what are these stuffed fowls? Amarav she'osino sambal kocham, you force feed them, which is actually like how they make foie gras, right? They force feed these ducks or something. Or again, is it geese? Whatever it was. Anyway, V'shmuel Amar she'ovsim v'omdim yalem. No, it means just that they're naturally fattened. Rabbi Yitzchak Omer Mivim Tor Mimar Isa B'Lo Anis. No, you bring an ox from its grazing, which has never been captured. It's a wild ox, never been put to work. V'Tarnagolas Me'ashbos B'Lo Anisa, and a hen, that's from its dung heap that has never been put to work to lay eggs. So basically, they're free range. Okay, that's what I mean, free range, and therefore they're fatter, although nowadays the fatter ones are not the free range ones. But anyway, that's what it means. I'm Rabbi Yochanan, sure. The best of all the animals, maybe from a food perspective, is the ox. Is tarnagolas. The best of the birds is the chicken, okay, or the hen. Amar Meimar, maybe for eating. Zagsa, now Meimar says, here's what it means, these fattened fowl. Zagsa uchmisa, a black hen, Beibat Nisa, which is, Rashi says, Beibat Nisa means, I'm trying to remember what Rashi says. What does Rashi say? Hold on. Which is basically, Rashi says, fattened in the house, or Rashi says it means with a big stomach. The Mishtaka Beni Atri, that's found there, but it's a pressing places. It's always eating on like the grapes and so on. Okay, another type of a fat duck. And it's so fat that it can't even step over a reed. Okay, so let's just read one more story about Abraham. Vela Bakar Ratz Abraham. Amar Yud Amarav. Ben Bakar Echad, so we said before, that's one, Rach Shnayim, Tov Shlosha, so 3 calves for the 3 people. The Ein Bachad. So why didn't it? Maybe all that means is 1 calf, which is soft and good. No, Kadami, in case people say rachich tatav, like soft and good. Maybe it's all describing 1 calf. In case list of rach tov, which is just it's soft good. My vitov, why and good? I mean, of course, the grammar demands the vav, but anyway, it's coming to tell you that it was an extra calf. The ema tray. So let's say ben bakar rach is 1 calf. Vitov is a 2nd calf. How do you know it's 3? No, miditov lidrasha. Since the word tov means a separate calf, rach nami lidrasha. The word rach soft also means it. So there were 3 calves. Okay, so Masi Rabbi Bar Ula. So Rabbi Ula asked, "V'itema Rabbi Yoshea, v'itema Rabbi Nasan, Rabbi Hoshaya. V'itema la nar v'yimher la sot oto." He gave it to the lad who went to do it. So it sounds like it's a single animal that's being prepared. So it's where it says no. Each animal he gave to a different youth to prepare. So he gave to the youth to prepare it, but he did that 3 times with 3 separate youths. Okay. Now, he took the butter and the milk and the calf that he had prepared. He leaf to him and he put it in front of them. The Metzia, what does it mean? He put it in front of them. As each dish was finished being prepared, he brought it in front of them. It's like you're at a restaurant. First they bring the first course, and then they remove it, and they bring the second. Right? It feels like it's very like it's sort of like also with Yaakov and Esav sending the different like gifts. One comes as soon as one comes, the next one comes afterwards. Right? It's this feeling of plenty. Okay. Also, some people sort of point out that's why he didn't eat milchiks and fleishiks together. First, they removed the milchiks, and then they brought out the fleishiks. A little retrojecting there, right? Because there's chema v'chalav, and then ben abakar. Okay. So now, why did you need 3? Okay, wasn't 1 calf enough for 3 people? Tiski bechad. So Amar Rav Chana bar Rava kidei la'achilon shlosh l'shonos b'chardal, because he wanted to give them 3 tongues in mustard, which was a delicacy. So he wanted to give it to each person. Of course, I don't know, a tongue is pretty big, a tongue of an animal. I think 1 tongue could, but anyway, that's why. Okay, so we'll end here. We'll end with this. So anyway, so Avram's feast in some ways was bigger. So if you make a promise to Bnei Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov to give them a feast, you're never going to finish feeding them. All right, to be continued tomorrow.